Hello everyone, thank you once again for joining me. My intention was, when I started the channel Together in Faith and Humility, was to produce at least a video once every 7 days. But as we all know, life tends to bog you down, things get in the way, injuries, illnesses, work. So it has been a couple of weeks since my last video on, if my memory recalls, I believe we were talking about manage a retreat and what the councils have got in store for us, the wonderful work that Kate Mason has been doing. And I just did see a new video that Kate was on, a podcast that she was on, just furthering the conversation around the Sendai framework and everything that the Australian government has signed on to. Now, whether or not all this comes to fruition is to be seen, but watch this space. Before I get into our conversation today, just a really quick recap on what's been happening over the last 7 days or so. And we've got the US elections just around the corner. Republican, Democrat, Kamala Harris, Donald Trump, Joe Biden. What an absolute circus. You don't know what to believe, whether or not things are going to work out, if this one gets in or that one gets in. It's, Donald Trump seems to be saying all the right things. Again, time will tell. Here in this country, we had the release of the COVID investigation. The pandemic response that put the nation at risk. Several measures in the COVID response would not be acceptable again. You've got people like Nick Coatsworth saying how, they were wrong. They were a little bit, ill-directed towards some of their actions. Sometimes you think, if someone, I think I mentioned this before, if you had replayed all those news items over that last, that 2-year period, and everything that was said by the celebrities and by the politicians and by the health experts, you'd sit back now and you think, goodness me, why did we all fall for that? Absolutely. It seems to be, and they were even discussing that we're blaming agricultural chemicals for neurological damage and disorders. And it seems to be everything else bar the darts that everyone took. That seems a bit rich, doesn't it? Maybe there'll come a time when everyone will have, I don't know. When I say they, the people who are in charge, come out and actually say that, yeah, we were wrong and everything that we gave or everything that we administered wasn't what it was supposed to be. There was another news item on October the 25th where there was a lady who was being interviewed. She met King Charles. He was out here for the races and so forth. And she was so overwhelmed. She was almost hyperventilating. And she says, we can die now at the end of the interview because she touched King Charles. Sometimes you think, is that a crisis actor? Was she paid to say that stuff? Do people, are they that invested, with the royal family? I don't know. Questions. There was also another news item in Canada, British Columbia, where people are still lining up, still getting the COVID injections and, breaking some records. So there are obviously still parts of the world that are, I don't know, what's the word I was going to use, still deeply captured, still so deeply complicit. Some compliant, I should say. It's very worrying. We've got the horrible and severe weather all around the world. And whether or not you believe in weather modification, whether or not you believe in the whole discussion around chemtrails, I know people who study meteorology and believe that these are just natural weather patterns and weather events. Whether or not some nefarious organisation is having a hand in tampering with the weather, that could be a possibility. We've got the police force here in Queensland, taking the Queensland Police Force to court, class action against the mandates and the unfair dismissal. But also the changes to the anti-vilification laws in Victoria around offending people. Just in a nutshell, you offend someone in a small minor way, you could end up in prison, slapped with a fine, spend time behind bars. Can become a real nanny state, haven't we? And talking about Victoria, Dan Andrews, he's hit the news just lately. To think that he was involved in an accident, he obviously hit a cyclist. That was almost 12 years ago, and it's only come into light now. Again, watch this space as far as Dan Andrews is concerned. I wonder whether or not they'll still erect that statue that they were talking about. We're talking about providing people with statues, with awards, nominating them for certain awards, and these are the individuals that just gave everyone such a hard time during those horrible years between 2020 and 2022. All those coercive mandates and all that stress, and we're awarding these people. It beggars belief, doesn't it? The ongoing horrible situation in Lebanon. This is what I don't understand. Here in Australia, I suspect that this is only an observation. I suspect the political class have some very strong affiliations with the Jewish lobby group, and our connections with Israel would be pretty strong, I'd say, at that political level. And yet we allow and this is again nothing against any faith whatsoever. Let's get that straight. But they allow a construction of a model car bar up at the top of Martin Place, just only a stone's throw away from New South Wales government up there on Macquarie Street. And just sort of again, you just scratch your head and you say, why? Just on one side we're all gung-ho for Israel, and on the other side we're then very sympathetic to the Palestinians. Sometimes again, there's just a disconnect as far as I feel anyway. But it's a tragedy, regardless. Children, men, women, elderly, are dying. Yes, our Immigration Minister, Tony Burke, handing Candace Owen a red card. Can't come into this country. Tony Burke. Some of these politicians, fair dinkum. Because she was going to incite some sort of, hatred because of her views. I think Jordan Peterson's having the same issue, I believe. And finally, just amongst all the other, dot points that I've got here, I'll give you two more. Sydney Water. Remember our conversation around the contaminated water? Well, Sydney Water has come out and declared that they're going to hike their rates, their prices, 18% I believe this year, and then the following 4 years, 7% every year for whatever reason. So instead of them not allowing us to pay because we're drinking contaminated water, those PFAS levels, the forever chemicals, which they've turned around now and told us everything's A-OK. Yeah, I bet it is. Instead of us not paying them a cent, we're going to, the privilege is that we're going to pay them more now. You shake your head sometimes and scratch your head and you just think, where's this country heading towards? The fact that there are so many people coming into this country, and God bless every single one of them. But all these people who are coming in, they're going to look after themselves. Now, messages like this, wouldn't it be great to have it all translated to different languages? And I visited my local council just the other day, just inquiring about some of the developments that seem to be springing up here and there. They showed me some sort of master plan. And I asked the question to the two gentlemen who were very professional. I asked them, has all this information been translated to all the various languages? Because I said, I think that's a priority. Because a lot of the plans, a lot of the pieces of legislation that seem to get passed have really, really small amounts of, public consultation. And they said, we're just time factors. We need, we've got time limitations from the state government, so we just do it in English. And you think, goodness me, no one's going to read this stuff. No one's going to understand it. It's another big, massive issue. Let's quickly get to what I wanted to discuss with you today, and it's about the material that's being presented in our schools. Being an educator for over close to 35 years, the issue of sexually explicit material in schools is becoming extremely problematic. It's not a new phenomenon. It's been happening for a while. It seems to be happening in certain areas. The information that I'm presenting today is from an organisation called Leave Our Kids Alone. So everything that is presented today is from this particular organisation. They're very, very good. So let me just... The first resource, it's libraries allowing books with pornographic illustrations to be read by children. And there's I'll leave the link for you guys. It says here, libraries are encouraged by the Australian Library Association to block or filter incoming complaints from concerned members of the community. This information plus more disturbing revelations can be viewed in the interview, which is with this particular link. And you say to yourself, an organisation like the Australian Library Association, if they're actually telling libraries to, filter incoming complaints or block, that's some serious steps that they're taking. I mean, as a parent, and I understand we're living in a day and age where access to material like this seems to be being accessed at a younger and younger age, which is, a hurdle, and it's a problem. But the easy access to information today it can be viewed as a good thing and can be viewed as a bad thing. But I always find it, I always believe it's a family decision what you allow your kids to see and to view and to discuss. And I get it. A lot of kids go out there, and when they're with friends and so forth, they're a little bit more bravado. There's conversations can be a little bit more explicit. I understand that, but we're talking about schools in particular and libraries, and there is a war. There is a war on our children, especially when you've got people dressed in drag. And again, I'm not casting any aspersions here, I'm making observations. People who want to dress up in drag, that's their choice. Want to parade in drag, that's their choice. But once you start to read or present material that is questionable to children, that's when you've got to start to ask a few questions. there was a particular school up here in New South Wales. Again, this information comes from Leave Our Kids Alone. It's a grammar school up here in the Hunter Valley. And they were teaching 15, 16-year-olds sexual explicit terms and content. It came from a Year 10 health workbook. And the publisher of this Year 10 health workbook was Matilda Education. And I'm just going to read to you a couple of the examples from this particular Year 10 health book. Now, again, you're probably going to say, well, this is 15, 16-year-olds. And a lot of 15, 16-year-olds today are sexually active. Yeah, granted, true. But there's also a number of students who aren't, high percentage who aren't, who may feel extremely uncomfortable. Do you think it's the school's role, it's an educator's role to present this information? Again, I'm just showing you, so maybe you can make up your mind. The first example concerns sexual consent. There's a little section called sexual consent, and this is what it writes. This is what it says: sexual activity includes intimate activities with someone else's body, like kissing, sensual touching, and please excuse me for the language that I'm going to use, but this is what's right in front of the students. Like kissing, sexual touching, including groping, digital penetration, oral sex, anal sex, mutual masturbation, sexting, sending nude images, cybersex. Sex is an activity that requires those participating to put themselves in a vulnerable position. You're often naked, physically close to someone, sharing intimate details about yourself, exposing sensitive and private body parts to someone else, and literally putting your body in someone else's hands, and in brackets, or mouth or genitals. It can be intimidating for sure. Now you say, okay, it is 2024, but does information like this need to be put in a workbook to then be presented to a Year 10 student? There may be some who say, well, yeah, because that's where we are in this world. I don't know. I'd feel very uncomfortable if my son, who was in Year 10, came home and said, Dad, take a look at this. Example number 2. And this is all within this workbook. Consenting to sex acts. Sex isn't just intercourse from a penis into a vagina. There's also oral sex, mutual masturbation, anal sex, deep kissing, hand jobs, penetrating with fingers, and so many more things. They're sending nude photos and explicit messages. There are different settings you can have sex in, different toys and tools you can use. What do you say? This is to a Year 10 student. It's pretty heavy stuff. I'm trying to be as diplomatic here as I can. And that content is within that workbook. It says here that the comments from Leave Our Kids Alone. There's absolutely no justification for educating and using these terms to teach children about consent. Introducing such language to children's vocabulary and making them aware of oral, anal, mutual masturbation, hand jobs and toys. This is inappropriate at best and disgusting at worst. Teachers have the responsibility and obligation to children, whilst under their supervision, to provide a non-harmful environment free from graphic sexual content. I think that's correct. I think it is graphic sexual content. And also that there are books that have a cartoon feel to it, and yet the images are pornographic, and they've been distributed in libraries? Wasn't there a book that was being touted for the Prime Minister's award? Nothing was said by the authorities, by the Prime Minister's office. Example number 3, age of consent. The age of consent refers to the age at which someone can consent to sexual activity. In particular, you might not be ready for sexual encounters with much older people who have more power and experience and can abuse that power. Notice the age, this is the commentary from Leave Our Kids Alone. Notice the age of consent is not listed. It varies from each state and territory. Why is the age not specifically stated? As any responsible worksheet giving children full knowledge around consent should have this clearly stated. It doesn't say. It says the age of consent refers to the age at which someone can consent to sexual activity. I suspect they didn't put it in there because it varies from state to state and territory, I gather. Explicit terms and examples are used to explain consent. However, in a moral and lawful regard, when the age of consent needs to be clearly defined, it is not stated. Therefore, on one hand, the workbook feels the need to be explicit and details as an excuse to describe inappropriate sexual content, then neglects to inform children of an extremely important detail and fact around age. The last sentence is of concern as well. Why would any educator feel the need to state, you may not be ready for sexual encounters with much older people? Yeah, that is a bit of a concern, isn't it? As a way of explaining abuse of power. The term much older people is clearly grooming and highly questionable and an unnecessary example to quote. What do you say about that? You know, when you've got people in drag reading questionable material to children, some might call that grooming. And are we being too sensitive? When I say we, those who are against this material. Example 4. This is a brainstorming activity. Get this for a question. Name as many sex acts as you can think of. That's a brainstorming activity. And then, hint, if you're struggling to think, use this checklist. So they provide you with a little address there to go, and there's a checklist. Again, I believe that's inappropriate. Then there's another example. They have a link. Bottom right hand corner, there is a highlighted link to a site that children are directed to for further information on sexual education. The site is called Scarletine, a grooming site for predators and groomers of children. This is the commentary from Leave Our Kids Alone. US parents are oblivious to the fact your child can be directed to such a website, which is a site based outside of Australia. It's in England, where children can join in live chats, access the message boards section, and ask sexually explicit questions to adults behind a keyboard from the other side of the world. And there is a screenshot here of a particular thread that discusses confused about masturbation and it doesn't feel good. And the person who is answering the questions is aged 35, is from Leeds, name's Jacob. So there you have it, 35-year-old man who we have no way of identifying who he is or what his qualifications are, is having sexually explicit interactions with children from this country. Now your mind just shoots over straight away. Grooming, nefarious, could lead to something even worse than just asking some questions, getting some clarification. Where have we come? Where mind boggles. And then I'm going to finish with this. Within the actual document, now we've gone a little bit overboard, but within the actual document, there's a disclaimer, this workbook. The Australian Curriculum Assessment and Reporting Authority, ACARA, neither endorses nor verifies the accuracy of the information provided and accepts no responsibility for incomplete or inaccurate information. In particular, ACARA does not endorse or verify that the material aligns with the Australian curriculum content descriptions for the relevant year and subject. You can find the unaltered and most up-to-date version of this material at www.australiancurriculum.edu.au. So, this is the words from Leave Our Kids Alone. Note the disclaimer above that is in the opening pages of the workbook. The Australian Curriculum Assessment and Reporting Authority neither endorses nor verifies the accuracy of the information and accepts no responsibility of the incomplete or inaccurate information provided. So, we have a document that is being taught to children which is of a highly inappropriate nature that is not endorsed by the Australian Curriculum Assessment Authority. Don't you find that a little slightly concerning? Issues like this, ladies and gentlemen, I gather probably occurring all over the country, in primary schools, in high schools. And it's about as serious as you can get. How do we stop this? How do we ask for some accountability? I suspect it's being a proactive parent, getting your children to understand that if material like this is ever presented when they're at school, for them to come straight home and spill the beans. But as a parent, you have to be proactive, because conversations that are being had in workbooks such as this, personally, I find that inappropriate, disturbing. And they did use a number of terms, grooming. So, be proactive, ladies and gentlemen, and to all the boys and girls out there. Just keep your eyes open and your ears peeled, and just be mindful of what's presented. As we always say, spend a little bit of time. Sit down, read the good book, read a verse or two every single day. Get closer to God, get closer to the Christ. Whatever faith you have, be good to people, be compassionate, love one another, forgive. And even reading all this material and presenting all this material, you can take a stance, you can stand and you can fight, but you've also got to be compassionate, and you've also got to be loving in the same breath. Until next time, be good, do good, glory to God.